be great. Here we go. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this month's Players and Layers of Banking as a Service. And we have two of my favorite people on perhaps two of the most boring topics. Actually, I don't mean that, you guys. I mean compliance related testing. To some might be boring, to others it might be exhilarating. And I'm glad that you two are individuals that are in the latter category. And truly, we're going to get into all of the reasons why compliance related testing, both from the marketing side and operational side, are not only pieces and parts that are fun and innovative and exciting inside an organization, but things that your institution should be thinking about if you're launching a banking as a service program, your first fintech program, or you're intending to scale that program. So we're going to get into all of this here today, but before we do, I'd love to introduce you to those two favorite people and my husband, Steve. You are absolutely my number one. So, but why don't we go ahead and get started with the other lady here on the call, Miss Katie? Would you mind to introduce a little bit about yourself and PerformLine?
Yeah, my pleasure. So I'm Katie Daly. I'm a senior manager here at PerformLine. I've been in this marketing compliance review space since 2019, helping to run and scale go-to-markets for pre-publication reviews, and now came over to the PerformLine team to help with complete omni-channel monitoring. So as you mentioned, it may not sound so pretty on paper, but marketing compliance is baked into everything that we do now for go-to-market, client acquisition, new leads, new members to credit unions. It is integral to sponsor banking community.
It so is. And again, I'll share a little bit more about even my journey to meeting both of you and your organizations. But before we do, I would be remiss if I also didn't extend the invitation to Mr. Shane. Shane, tell us about you and about Cable, which I'm wearing the socks today. I would show you my socks and slippers, but I did that honestly for this conversation. Katie, we can talk about PerformLine merch later. We'll get into that. But Shane, go ahead, kind sir.
Yeah, no, Stacey, thanks for having me. It's good to be on this panel with everybody. I'm not wearing my traditional pink, so I might get called out for that. Yeah, I mean, quick bio on myself. I've been in finance my entire career, kind of started on the banking side. So worked as an investment banker on the derivative sales desk, helping corporate customers develop risk kind of mitigating strategies with derivatives. So interest rate volatility. Yeah, it's a fun fact that I only like to throw it at parties. But it positioned me for, where I am today within Cable and kind of in the world of compliance. So got a lot of exposure to kind of building out custom risk mitigating structures there, and then made the leap probably about 5 years ago into fintech and joined a banking as a service infrastructure company, got my feet wet there, and really kind of immersed myself in the world of embedded banking and sponsor banking. And then had the opportunity to join Cable 2 years ago as the head of sales, and super excited about what we're doing because it's extremely relevant to the state of banking today. We are software that automates the effectiveness testing of all of your compliance controls. We can do that across your own banking controls, or we can do it across your fintech's controls. So you have full visibility over everything that they're doing on a much more continuous basis. So oversight being the key word here, and something that's being hammered into everyone's minds over the last few years. So we're kind of help, augment that process for a lot of folks.
Yeah, and I love that you leaned into just your banking as a service background, Shane, and the fact both you and Katie and the companies that you represent, PerformLine and Cable here, they have such an important role for organizations in the embedded banking space because things are just bigger. The scale is different, and the requirements are unchanged. All of the requirements still fall squarely on the shoulders of the sponsor bank, all of which a conversation we're going to get into. But I would be remiss if I didn't introduce Mr. Stephen Bishop, the gentleman that introduced me both to each of you and your organizations, and has been along this journey with each of your organizations in the past. Steve, would you care to share a little bit about yourself?
It's it's never about me. It's so I don't want to make it about myself. On the swag
It's
front,
going to be one of those webinars, you all. Okay, go ahead.
no, I'm Steve Bishop, and no, I've been a fan of PerformLine and cable for a while now, and excited to have them on. And Shane, well, Katie, not putting pressure on you, but Shane, our daughter also played basketball in cable socks. So, yeah.
I need photographic evidence. Photographic evidence, please.
You're fully repping the brand. So yeah. Again, Katie, let's see what we can do. We love to rep our friends out and about and explain to people, why are you wearing cable socks? Well, let me tell you all about it. You may not know cable yet, but here's why you should. And we're happy to do the same thing with PerformLine. So you all, before we get started, my name is Stacy Bishop. I am married to the gentleman you just heard from, Steve Bishop. The only real relevance to that is the fact that for the past 5 years, while Steve was getting into, maybe 6 now, into embedded banking for himself, the fact that I also work in this industry means that I was pulled along on this journey happily, not pulled along kicking and screaming, but introduced to the whole environment and world of embedded finance. It was new to me coming from a large core company provider where I worked selling fintech to banks and to working with organizations around the country, and then also working with fintechs. And when Steve decided to pursue this concept of embedded banking, first and foremost, that was unique to me, even growing up in this space. And he literally blew my mind when he started talking about the need for marketing compliance and testing and tracking and monitoring. And then also the same types and levels of testing and controls when it came to regulations that I had grown up with, working in banking, working in fintech, selling to banks, but never realized there was this, it's not the dark underside or underbelly, the need for this testing. How naive am I, you guys? I didn't realize that was a thing until about, I don't know, 5, 6 years ago when Steve mentioned this was an area they were exploring because they were getting into embedded banking. So I'll share a little bit more about my naivete around these subjects as we get going, but why don't we go ahead and just transition to the next environment out here, the next little slide. We're just going to be talking about, with these two fine folks, the concept of compliance testing. It does not sound like it's the most exciting thing. You may be like me and not realize that it was as much of a requirement, as much of a need for financial institutions, and that's okay. We're all here, we're all starting where we are. The point of this conversation is just to ensure that any organization in the embedded space or thinking about going that direction has full knowledge about the need for compliance testing and not a one-time test internally on the traditional bank side or with a fintech partner, but this concept of ongoing and continuous type of monitoring. You'll hear that recurring theme as we get going. So you all, let's take a look at just what I like to think of in terms of a traditional bank testing model. This is your traditional organization, and I'm painting with broad brushstrokes here when I say traditional, but for the purposes of our conversation, let's think in terms of a single bank entity that has their own products that they're marketing. They have customers or members that they're servicing at their credit union, and they have the same regulations that every other FI across the US has to contend with, or has to prove viability and has to prove evidence that they're meeting that criteria. So in this example, as you see here, let's just talk about the single entity where there are centralized controls. And most commonly, what I have learned as part of just getting to know each of you and your organizations, the way in which a more traditional organization approaches testing, either on marketing or the operational side, is a sample-based type of testing. True story so far? Is this what we're seeing?
Accurate, yeah.
Yeah.
And this is not not even subject to any certain size, right? Right, you all? I mean, these are sometimes mid-tier banks that might be doing sample-based testing, very manual-based testing. I see Katie shaking her head.
It's
Steve
across the
shaking
board.
herself.
Across the
Across
board.
the board. And that's the thing. I mean, I think naively when I came into the conversation, and again, I believe my first question to Steve was, is that really a thing, marketing compliance and testing that compliance? And he's like, yes, to which I felt badly. I'd been in this space, it feels like forever, that I didn't realize the need for that element. And Shane, on more of the regulatory testing side, Reg E and other regulations, I sort of just assumed that doing a sample was okay, that it was sufficient. And I have had my eyes blown wide open. I also assumed, you all, that if there were any challenges, that it might be within the smaller organizations. And that is truly just not the case, I think, as we heard Shane mention. It is across the board. Organizations, maybe your own organization, if you're watching this, is doing sample-based testing and just monitoring and tracking right now on the marketing and the operational compliance side as well. So I guess what I would like to think about here, you guys, and this is just a question I'm posing at the bottom of the screen for this panel, when you think about traditional bank testing and those models, what kind of assumptions are baked in to that model that just don't hold true once you get into sponsor banking? And Steve, I might direct this at you first from the banker angle. What did that mean? What did that look like for you?
I think for me, it's all about scale. And if you look at traditional community banks, way too often they're just doing things manual, or they're not, like, you don't have to test marketing compliance unless you want to make sure that you're compliant, right? Like, if you don't want to get in trouble, then you need a test. If you don't care if you get in trouble or not, then just ignore it. And like, you can do that at a very small scale. And then as we saw, like, social media and all these different avenues, that suddenly not only you but your employees have access to post, and they can post about their job, like, and if it's whether they're trying to raise deposits or lending, and they're quoting rates, there are certain things that have to be done. And then, like, as you have that customer, you have these regs and you got to test them. And yeah, you can do a sample, but you're hoping that the same sample, that random sample that you chose, is the same sample that your examiners chose.
Oh yeah.
Or you can use, like, as you scale, there are these, it's much broader, a lot more data that you need to digest, make sure that you're compliant with. So what better way to do that than with technology? So I think it's awareness. I had a CFO and a CRO in the past that did not understand or appreciate the importance of technology, and the bank struggled as a result of it. So you always have to look at those ways human is going to be a part of that workflow, but how do you accentuate, how do you improve them and leverage technology to make sure that you're compliant and doing it in the most efficient manner?
Yeah, and for the record, you are not advocating that people don't test their marketing. Correct.
Only if you don't care about being compliant. Like,
I realize you're saying ignorance could be bliss here, but ignorance could also be financially damning. There could be financial.
If you want to keep that charter, make sure you're compliant. That's what I'll say.
Okay. No, that's a great way to say it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. And you know what makes this conversation even more interesting to me now, there, you mentioned that if you want to keep your charter, we're starting to see a lot of non-traditional banks now receive charters. So people that these types of conversations may not have been as close to these discussions in the past. Very, very important now as we're starting to see new players, fintechs purchasing banks, fintechs being granted charters at this juncture. Pay attention to this discussion, and of course the compliance elements. Well, Katie and Shane, anything that you might say differently than what Steve mentioned there just now around this topic of what doesn't hold true once you get into sponsor banking, or anything you'd like to add out there?
Yeah, I mean, going off of that kind of not having the awareness, or as you said, the naiveness about we need this, right? it's almost like the ostrich theory. You can't put your head in the sand and pretend like it doesn't exist around you because you don't see it. These are very real risks, as you mentioned, for brand reputation, making sure that your customers are happy and you're doing right by them, and the consumers have awareness of the wonderful work that you're doing and the promotions that you're offering. Sample-based auditing is impossible to find the needle in the haystack and the true risks unless you're striking with lightning with great timing. So it does everyone a service to have omni-channel oversight across all of your channels, and it gets more complex with the more partners that you start working with.
That's so true. And I am going to give Steve credit for something that he mentioned. You're welcome, Stephen. But you did make the comment that sample-based testing could be okay as long as the samples you're choosing are the exact same ones that your examiners are going to choose. And that holds true whether it's on the marketing side or, Shane, even over on your side when we're talking about the alphabet soup of regulations that bankers are responsible for managing. And so often in my past, again, I just thought that was enough. I thought we were checking the box and we were moving on and life was great. But life is not always great, even in a traditional bank model. There's still plenty of holes in both the marketing side or the operational reg side for banks to select a sample that doesn't exactly mirror the same sample that examiners would choose, right?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. Everything that Steve and Katie said is spot on. And in addition to that, I think we're seeing just a shift, right, in terms of how things are done. I think in the past, examiners understood the fact that sampling was essentially a workaround for manual testing constraints, right?
Yeah.
There's no one out there who would have hired enough people to test 100% of your accounts and transactions. If they tried doing that, they no longer have a job at that bank, I would imagine, right? So it was a sign of the times. It's clear now that there is a lot of technology out there that can make this a much more efficient and more proactive versus a reactive type of exercise. And so you're seeing regulators and examiners come around to that and say, anecdotally, we've even heard from banks that have said, we've been asked, how are we going to improve or make our testing more comprehensive, to banks that are either thinking about entering BaaS or are already there, right, and are starting to see those scaling good problems, but also problems that could lead to, or things that could lead to something detrimental, as you said, down the road. So I think it's very much now becoming table stakes to incorporate something that's more proactive, more continuous, and as Katie mentioned, much more broad, so that you can't really rely on ignorance as being an excuse. You have the tools there. How do you incorporate them into your business? I think is kind of the question that everyone's asking.
I had not thought about that angle before or appreciated that as it pertained to testing, what you said there, Shane. And that was a jewel for me. And the jewel that I'm mentioning is technology has advanced so greatly that the same tech that a sponsor bank is providing services for with those fintechs that are spinning up this great tech and you're embedding your services in, those great technology companies are pushing the boundary of what end users expect. I know it's changed the way that I approach purchasing decisions and decisions that I make out in the world. If I take that into the organization, technology has exploded, undoubtedly, that the same elements that we were able to kind of get by with in the past, and that's not the right term, it's not get by with, but the same expectations of sampling being okay is not okay anymore. It's not enough because examiners see that there's so many other tools, technology has exploded, and that the capability absolutely can and does exist to move beyond a sample-based type of process. So I'm pontificating because truly I just hadn't thought about that. Shane, you are wise, man.
See, Steve, I've got a gem every now and then.
He's doing this sober, which is even, we think, which is.
He is.
Like with sampling, and I'm not going to do too much of a statistics lecture. Like it is an acceptable model. Like you're taking a sample, you have a comfort, but you're never going to have 100% comfort. And like when you know, like your examiners, if you keep in mind, they're going to be adding tools as well, so they can have more access and find that more. So like, how comfortable do you want to be coming in? Do you want to say we've have this sample size with 95% confidence, or do you want to have technology that is either flagging it or saying, here's what you need to look at? You have fintechs that are used to just market testing, and you know, like Mr. Beast and his fintech acquisition. Now you have these influencers that are coming in, these creators that like they're used to just mass marketing, changing that message all the time. In a bank, how are they going to keep up in a traditional model unless they have tools to say, this is okay, this needs a closer look at? Or they're bringing in all these transactions, and you know, you're going to see much more movement, volatility, and all of these transactions. How are you going to keep an eye on it if you're a traditional bank with, like, you still have that traditional book of business? How are you going to scale that up when you have all these new things in? And that's where it really comes in, making sure that everything is staying compliant as you go along.
Yeah. And that creator angle, that influencer angle, is one that we have been watching for about the past 4 or 5 months. We've just started seeing this interest of creators and influencers rolling out financial related products or solutions geared towards these individuals, embedding bank services within the solutions, like Kajabi. So influencers that are rolling out courses or doing all sorts of really cool things. And I think that's an important consideration. To your point, Steve, Mr. Beast is used to just changing and experimenting and testing, A/B testing, probably ABCDE testing, in order to see what's going to hit and what's going to resonate. And I do think we're going to see a great acceleration in that regard. Thank you for not taking us too deep into statistics. Just Katie and Shane, I will just mention that Steve did date his statistic professor's daughter, so we won't get into that on this call. We can pick that up at FinTech Meetup. But let's go ahead and move into the next piece. And we've already started alluding to this, the fact that in that traditional model, we had containers, one entity, programs and products that we controlled. And we thought at that point in time, at least most organizations believe, probably good enough to do the sample testing. The stakes change when we get into the sponsor bank environment and this partner banking model, where we have the bank there in the center and various fintech programs. 3, 4 plus shown here. Many partner bank models scale up to scores and scores of these fintech programs. Now, ultimately, it doesn't matter how many programs you have, 1 or 20, 30, 40 or more. The bank ultimately owns all aspects of compliance, and that includes the monitoring and the testing. And that's what I want to get into next here, because both of your organizations do operate within sponsor banks. Some of the most exciting programs we see out there in the industry, some of the biggest names that we see in sponsor banking are customers of each of your organizations. So I guess at what point, you all, do you realize, as we start thinking through this, that we need to do something different? The testing design, the sample design, it's not going to keep up with the way in which we're executing. I guess what I'm saying, and let me phrase this differently. My question is it with the first fintech program? Is it with the 3rd or the 20th? Do you guys have any thoughts on this? I think I know where you might land, but hit me.
I think you know what I'm going to say, Stacy. So it's easier to get ready than it is to retroactively become ready and scale ready. So from the time that you start thinking about that first fintech partner, whoever you're going to start working with, you have it right on the slide. The accountability stays with the bank. So you should immediately start thinking, how am I going to monitor their channels, whether that's their owned and operated website? Are they using lead acquisition sources? So now do I also have to monitor a third party and affiliate and partner sites? Are they using influencers? Does that add in the complexity of now I have to monitor TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, Meta, you name it? It's easier to scale and have your guardrails in place than it is to go out and retroactively add it in piecemeal and trying to get a hold of it once an examiner walks into the bank and starts going through issues with you.
You just blew my mind. I hadn't thought through the extended parties there, the TikTok influencers and others, the Mr. Beast before Mr. Beast became sort of a banker here himself. This far reaching, there's a lot of tentacles out there that a sponsor bank is ultimately responsible for in that case. And it's the same in your world, right, Shane? I mean, you have fintechs that are saying that you can open deposit accounts, or they issue debit cards, and there's stipulations that still need to be honored. And it's very possible that these stipulations may not exactly jive in the long term with the way that the sponsor bank is hoping. At least that's an assumption, and that might be a big assumption on my part. But how do you see this from your seat, Shane, when it comes to testing the regulatory compliance?
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what Katie said, right? It's build automation from day one with your first fintech partner. I mean, big believer here in early action, preventing costly retrofitting, during growth phases, right? So you don't want to wait until you've got 3 partners and there's a manual testing crisis to start figuring out how to, make this a more efficient process. So maybe a best practice that we've seen across a lot of the banks that we work with is making, whether it's cable or any automated testing tool, a precondition for fintechs that they're partnering with, right? Which enables the sponsor bank to then have ongoing observability from day one over all their partners. And really what that does is it obviously it sets you up for easier scalability. It gives you a chance to kind of get real-time feedback, kind of what a lot of people call the friends and family period of any type of relationship, right? And that can be a pretty onerous period as well, because you're typically more stringent with your testing. You're asking for a lot of information for the fintech. You're going back and forth over emails and all these other areas that are taking time away from focusing on the business. When it's automated from day one, you can actually start doing a lot of that in real time. And it just accelerates the ability of both the fintech and the bank to kind of come together and figure out how to go from there. So I would say that to me it's a huge, it's something that gets missed a lot, right? Because people do their investment a lot on the business side and they think about kind of the other costs later, but this could be a very big cost down the road if it's not, thought of kind of sooner than later.
Yeah, preventative money well spent. And Steve, I'm sorry, I was going to invite you to weigh in. Mr.
Yeah,
Baker.
well, I'm going to disagree a little bit. I think the magic number is somewhere around 6, 7.
Can you mute him? Are you allowed to mute him?
Yeah, let me find that button. Let me find. I cannot believe you did that.
I've been sitting on that one for a while, just waiting. So I agree that best practice is to do this before. It's always easier to plan ahead than to try to catch up with the current velocity. That is a challenge, especially when you're putting out this expense. You're building this program and investing in it. So justifying that can be troublesome, or be like, there can be a hurdle there. I'll say that. It adds to the need for education throughout that organization to have that and preparation. If you're a new entrant into this space, you're probably not going to have an established fintech that's coming on board. So it's going to be a startup. So that will buy you a little bit of time to get in front of it. But also keep in mind that these platforms are not BaaS only. It is not mutually exclusive. If you have a financial institution that's doing the same type of work that you can actually use within your traditional model and validate that expense. So absolutely best practice, do it as soon as you can. You may have a buffer in there as your programs come online and they get up to speed as well, but sooner rather than later is definitely my advice when it comes to when you should be looking at these.
I think those are good practical points, you guys, because there is a justified expense needed. There is an investment in the bigger scope of BaaS. It is sometimes difficult to justify a few of those expenses up front unless you perhaps build the wedge in on the traditional bank side. Is that something you have seen some of your organizations do? They get started on the traditional side, and then as the program launches and as fintechs are brought on, they expand it onto the BaaS side? Or do you normally see the other way around, BaaS then traditional? You do, Katie? You see traditional then into BaaS?
Absolutely. I mean, the marketing compliance, owned and operated, having those controls in place makes sense regardless of where they start.
Okay.
And going back to your point, Steve, too, about working with someone like the startup fintechs, and maybe they're not as well known or robust in the area, that poses such a huge risk. When we think about when people are a startup, the first place you spend dollars is usually in marketing. And it could become like the Wild West, right? Because you don't have maybe a proper CCO in place, or someone kind of doing controls. Maybe it's a GC moonlighting as your CCO and getting these things. So there's a lot of factors to consider as you're starting, regardless of the point.
That makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. I'm going to move on to the next slide then, you guys, because what we see in the embedded bank space, what we're hearing from regulators, what they tell bankers, is sometimes viewed, I don't want to say ambiguous, but there can be a little bit of gray area around what examiners and regulators say and what they're intending for you, what their expectations are. We encounter this all the time with our own children. Sometimes you say what you really want and what you mean, and what you get is something entirely different. Not that there's any correlation with regulators to banks as parents to children, but I'm saying that there is often a loss in translation when it comes to communication. So we do often hear regulators say ongoing monitoring, and what that means is truly ongoing monitoring. It's not, test a sample every quarter or every year, and that's ongoing. Because of some of those expectations and the technological advances, they really do mean continuous, automated coverage that's being done across the board. Effective compliance management, they want documented access across channels, board level oversight. There needs to be evidence that the board can view and review around your compliance, because ultimately we all know that compliance aspect, it does roll up to the board, that level of oversight and responsibility. And then that overall third-party risk management for each person we bring on board, each partner we bring on board, does mean testing what those partners are actually doing, not just what they agreed to at the time that we formed a partnership, and what they tell us they're doing. So I guess what I want to just ask this panel about, when regulators say ongoing monitoring, what does that look like in terms of testing design? I'm not even sure what I would love to hear as far as the answer. I think it's more so just, if you think about a bank that doesn't have any automation, that is doing sampling, and they're trying to fit this in with their other job responsibilities, and then you plop the latest and greatest technology like PerformLine and Cable in their labs, how do they need to approach even designing that testing? Does that make sense? Okay, Katie's saying that. Okay. Shane, you popped in there. Why don't we let you go ahead first, sir?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think anyone trying to translate regulatory guidance over the last several years it's definitely more of an art than a science, right? So exactly. We'll all take a stab at it, and hopefully that's changing in the coming years. But like you said, ongoing, right? What does that actually mean, right? So everyone's kind of forced to make their own interpretation. But I think you hit it on the head. Continuous. Now, what does continuous mean, right? So when I think about this, it's all the first line controls that banks have, and if their fintechs are managing those controls, right? Onboarding, IDV, right? And then of course there's sanction screening and transaction monitoring. Those are first line controls that are running continuously. They're running daily. And those are critical to your business to flag things that need to be investigated or are anomalous, right, to the business. Shouldn't it be just as critical to have then continuous testing to validate that all of those controls are actually doing what they say they should be doing versus doing it more periodically, right? Which I think up until about 2024, when there was a slew of consent orders, right, flying off the shelves, most people kind of thought of this probably to appease a compliance exam or the regulatory exam or an audit. It's clearly not the case now, right? Yeah, and again, technology wasn't really there to help support it, but that's not the story anymore. This now exists. There's technology to support this, and I think regulators expect to see that continuous is something that's more of a behavior that you're doing consistently, daily, weekly, versus something that you throw out there, quarterly or semi-annually.
Right. Have somebody carve out a day in their schedule each quarter to do it. Yeah. Katie, what about from your point of view? I mean, you were talking about the sheer sprawl that takes place from the marketing, the social angles, influencer angles. How would a bank begin to think about designing the way they test marketing for their programs or their partners? Is that something you assist them with, or take me through that process, please?
Absolutely. So it's one of the most important pieces of making sure that your monitoring solution is set up correctly. You need some sort of guardrails, what we call machine readable rules, a compliance guideline that puts stakes in the ground saying this is how we're going to approach compliance. This is the way that we are going to communicate across all of our fintechs, our partners, the affiliates we're working with, how we want to approach this marketing compliance topic across every single channel. So if I could steal this slide for all of my sales, you're basically selling me PerformLine, just putting this up here. Yeah. The first, documenting your controls across all partners, you need one centralized location. In order to do that effectively, that should be automated and deployed to crawl all of those channels. So we define continuous test coverage as every 24 hours. We're going out to the web. We're taking screenshots on your behalf. We're ingesting social posts, videos, making transcripts. So you really have 360 coverage into your compliance program, where you're being marketed, how it's being marketed, and what's being said. Behind the scenes, kind of like behind the curtain, what's actually happening is we're taking your compliance guidelines, we're plugging them into an automated solution, so it's being done at scale. It's not something that you can throw bodies at to fix this problem. If someone's new and they're saying, we don't know what our playbook is, we don't know what compliance looks like, we have 17 years of experience where we have out-of-the-box rule guidelines, they plug and play and say, all right, we know we need UDAP, we need TILA, RISPA, whatever it is, and they're good to go and they can iterate from there.
I love that. And I want to bring this back to Steve, to you for a moment, because I know you've been down this journey now a couple of times and advised other organizations getting into BaaS. That's what you want to hear, right? What Katie just mentioned, their years of experience, the fact that they know how to design this testing. I would imagine, don't let me put words in your mouth, but I would imagine that's what you want to hear, because you want to focus on your day job, not designing testing for the alphabet of regs like we know Shane and the cable team take care of, or all of the various places your name or logo could appear, or testimonials about your organization online. Is that fair to say, or did you really want to get involved in designing testing when you did that?
I'm never one to disagree with you. It's one of my guiding principles.
Since when? Okay, go ahead.
I think absolutely with anything, if you're starting a new revenue stream, a new business line, identify your strengths. And, just like the fintech specialty is customer acquisition, you no longer have to worry about that. You get to focus on the compliance, but it's going to be more nuanced. So you're going to have to look for those tools to leverage it. So hearing I want to have specialists that are helping me out. So in each regard, I do a good job at a high level, but when I get into the details, I need a specialist. And so how do I augment that? I don't want to build it. I mean, especially as a small community bank, I don't have an IT staff of developers that I can go do it. I mean, I can vibe code over the weekend. We'll see how successful that is. But I mean, it's getting better and better. But I think you have to look for those tech, those providers, those specialists that you can bring in and help at the end of the day.
Yeah, fair point. I do want to get into a couple of slides relative to marketing compliance and PerformLine. Then we'll do the same thing for Ms. Shane for your side in cable. But when we do think of marketing compliance, and we won't spend a ton of time out here, Katie, I was blown away by all of the things that a bank is ultimately responsible for tracking about their own brand as well as fintech partners. And just the sheer amount of pre-publication planning that should be done, and I guess you're always hoping is done for those fintech partners, and the way in which sometimes you might be catching things after the fact. So you kind of see on this slide some of the differences between how, I'm not going to say easy, but how much easier it is in a traditional bank model to monitor and track and test marketing compliance than in this sponsor bank model, considering the sprawl out there. So Katie, what are some of the common blind spots, especially any that you have seen from organizations that you work with, where the bank, the sponsor bank, assumes they have an idea on how something is being marketed, but it may come off differently. And I know I've read some things as far as it might be shown as something advertised as a free account or FDIC insured, and perhaps there are elements of truth there. There are elements that we should avoid stating online. So I'd love to know any blind spots from your point of view.
Did you just read our benchmark report that came out yesterday?
I did not, but I will now.
You literally just said it. You just summarized it. So very timely. Our fabulous marketing team just did an anonymized survey. They crawled 25 of the biggest banks you can think of. And so we're talking over 20,000 URLs looked at for a period of a few weeks. And we pulled in all of the highest risks at scale. 65% of the issues all came from the same reoccurring places. And the number one was the use of the word free. Because it's so prominent in marketing, it makes sense. You want to put out the latest and greatest and get those customers and acquisitions. So when we're thinking about sponsor bank, to go back to your questions, what's a blind spot or kind of what's surprising when someone embeds PerformLine, it really is the scale at which these compliance issues slowly have compounded because you have third parties, affiliates, news sources picking up and reusing your content in multiple ways. And their interpretation of the content. So you kind of have that first line pre-publication review risk. We're controlling it in-house. It feels great. We know what our compliance feedback is. As soon as it gets posted online, anyone can pick it up and reuse it. So we have what we call a Kraken crawler, and it's proactively feeding you those results to show you where your actual blind spots are every single day.
Do you say release the Kraken when it's going on? I think I would. But you mentioned something there, Katie, and I don't know, it just jogged something loose in my mind, and that's the fact that once it's out there, anyone can reuse it. I don't know how many newsletters you subscribe to or get. I get a ton. I don't think I'm alone in this, and many of them are curated, where they're bringing in news sources from other places. And I hadn't even thought about the fact that information that might be published or put out there incorrectly by a fintech itself that has a relationship with a sponsor bank, that could be picked up, and that just becomes an area that feeds along. That luckily, when you release the Kraken, it's going to let you know all about. Steve, did you know that PerformLine called their crawler the Kraken?
I did not, but yeah, totally released the Kraken.
Sounds like there's a swag opportunity there.
Oh. Not just here to sell and talk about regulatory compliance. He is helping with the marketing side. Now, for the PerformLine marketing team, we apologize in advance for the ideating that you're going to see on this call. But these are legitimate things, and I'm glad we have the Kraken out there. But I don't want to talk too much about PerformLine necessarily, but I would love for anyone that's watching this to reach out to Katie or others on the PerformLine team, because of the elements that they bring to this discussion. The fact that they are assisting with these automated discovery, those pre-publication components, scanning with the Kraken, and other elements in that ongoing fashion. Katie, I'm seeing that we're down to about 15 minutes of time here. So I'm going to skip this one question for you, if you don't mind, my dear. And I'm going to move over here to Shane's side of the house for a second, because while each of your areas are very, very niche and very important, there's an element of crossover we'll get into here. Before we get beyond that, Shane, let's talk a little bit about the regulatory control testing environment. Again, just so naive coming into this discussion, thinking that this had to be tested in a bigger, broader capability, but I understand completely why that is the case. For a traditional bank to monitor in that ongoing fashion, using Steve's example, you just might not choose the same sampling of accounts or the same aspects to test transactions that your examiners do. So you do need elements that you've just got to monitor. You've just got to keep a handle on. And I pulled out a few of the areas that I know you play in or operate around, and just compared them from the traditional side of the house to the bank sponsor or the sponsor bank side of the house. And I think the biggest area that I just continue to see is that loss of control once it's out of the bank's hands. And Shane, some of the reading and research that I had done prior to our discussion today all operated and centered around this concept that in the sponsor bank environment, a banker like Steve or his teams would formulate a relationship with a fintech. And as of that day, everyone's on the same page. Everyone knows what good looks like. And then we start to see accounts added, even more and more accounts, or more transactions processing through, customers being added. And there might be the best of intentions to continue to monitor back towards good. It just doesn't always happen that way, right? So that is something that I guess I'm kind of interested when you start seeing disputes of any kind. When you start seeing this creep, even more importantly, I guess, than the question I have here at the bottom, what I would love to know is, where do you often first see that creep away from good? Do you have a sense of, is it reggie? Is it something else entirely? Where do we start seeing fintechs go off center? And I'm going rogue on you here. I apologize.
No, it's fine. I think I'm not going to call out. I don't know. I'm not dancing around the answer here, but I'm not going to call out a specific one, whether it's BSA or Reg E. I think I can give examples of both of those, and in the format of it being around procedures, right? I think it's very important to understand that all businesses are different, right? So there, for one partner, what makes sense and something to prioritize, whether it's BSA, AML, or fair lending, it may not be relevant, right, for another. Clearly, that's obvious. But for the large majority of these fintech partners, procedural compliance and SLA adherence, I think, are really, really good places to start, and leading indicators, to your point, around where you can see if there's an issue. So for like disputes, for example, I can think of a test that we run. It's testing that all investigation results have been reported to the customer within 3 business days after completion of the investigation, right? That's a test. Or provisional credits have been provided within 20 business days. And then maybe on the AML side, it's all transaction monitoring alerts have been dispositioned within 60 days, or whatever that SLA period is that you agreed to with your partner. Those are, and what we've seen from our experience, really good indicators if fintechs are starting to miss some of their mark. And maybe that's because the volume is overwhelming them. Maybe it's just because there's a gap in their procedures on how they manage this, or maybe it's just a lack of effort, right? And understanding that piece of it at the outset is very important versus, and of course there's baseline tests and you can tweak them all based on the size and the product base and those things. But I think procedurally, making sure that everyone's aligned and working together and that they're hitting their mark, that's a very big first step, and I think a good indicator of if something's falling down.
That sounds great. Steve, I want to position this one towards you and Shane as well, just from this regulatory control testing. Have you found that there's an appetite to enter into one of these testing use cases first? I know, Shane, you gave us a couple of examples, And Steve, I'd be interested with your approach and what you've seen in visiting with other BaaS bankers as well. Did you guys go gangbusters and just start testing it all continuously? Did you dip your toe into the water? Like, what's the right answer there for a banker listening to this?
I mean, I don't know if there's a one size fits all approach. There a lot of it's gonna be preference. Like you're gonna have Reg E components, you're gonna have AML/BSA. Like you might, fair lending is on the lending side. I didn't deal with that as much, but it's like of the programs that you're having, which one's going to be a higher risk for that? And I'd probably start there and roll it out. I like phased approaches. I mean, there are times to roll everything out, but the sooner you can get that initial confirmation of this is working, this is providing value, the easier that use case is to leverage. Like, let's do it here as well, and work that through the organization so it's accepted. And it helps with that education that we alluded to earlier.
Shane, I'm begging for you to disagree with Steve, or do you agree with him?
I guess half and half here. The phased approach is certainly something you don't want to overwhelm people with, just right, because it is a step up to go from manual sampling and testing to automated and ideally 100%. And so a phased approach is very sensible. What we see a lot of times is that it's very data driven, right? Obviously, risk materiality is paramount, but then is the data accessible, right? And it's a lot of times, and maybe a piece of advice that I would give to any bank out there starting a sponsor program is start with your data. Figure out what you're going to do. If it's going to be aggregating all of your data in your own proprietary data lake or using Snowflake or BigQuery, centralizing that is going to make your life a lot easier as you scale. It's going to make implementations with other partners like PerformLine or Cable or whoever a lot easier, because it is essentially a single access point, and there's a lot of other benefits as well. But if it's not structured in that manner, and we found that in a lot of cases it's not, then what's the easiest way to plug in where, as Steve mentioned, you can start seeing value quickly and then kind of define a rollout plan from there and make sure that you hit obviously all the high priorities, but you don't want to take 6 months to start, pulling data together just to get one framework ready, right? You want to at least start getting that automation in play.
Very good. Very political answer. Bravo. Also pulled out very, very well. Katie, I do want to ask, I know this doesn't say marketing compliance here, but from the marketing compliance and testing point of view, how do you approach that, or how have you seen banks do it? Is it a big bang theory, or is it also testing use cases?
Yeah, it depends on the use case. Some people like that kind of crawl, walk, run approach to make sure they're deploying the compliance methodically. Maybe there's new channels they're about to get into, so they don't necessarily need it right at the start. And then we see the opposite, where if a consent order is underway or there's some sort of exam happening, we need everything. Let's go. Let's make sure that we clean this up early. So no problem. Everyone's different.
Very nice. Also very political. Also, I agree with both of you. I agree with Steve as well. I agree with the group. You all, we have about 7 minutes left. I just want to mention that for our fine folks from Cable and Shane, you can look at cable.tech is the indication that I want to give you if you're searching for them online, or search and find Shane's smiling face on LinkedIn, or Tash, the CEO. But you're going to find here some of the surprising elements that they bring to your world, just like we saw PerformLine brings and some of their notable value propositions that do require, I would suggest that you just look a little bit deeper. Maybe it doesn't require. I beg of you to look a little bit deeper to make your world and that of your team members more effective, make everyone's world more efficient, and to have that continuous ongoing compliance. You guys, I don't know. In some of my research, I was reading quite a bit about FDIC Part 328 and the fact that the digital signage and the deposit insurance stipulations and things that we see does pose a great risk for misrepresentation. I hadn't thought about this. Katie, you're smiling, so I'm guessing this does pull into your world. Is this an accurate twist or threat that bankers need to think about in the traditional side as well as the sponsor bank side?
Definitely. It's a one piece of the puzzle for making sure just at scale you're not misrepresenting offers or your services that you are promoting on various channels, especially when you get into some of those startup fintechs like we mentioned earlier. Not everyone truly understands what they can and cannot say and or when they need to say it. So this helps to standardize the approach.
Do you get into any challenges where a fintech believes that they should be able to own their messaging entirely because they're wanting to do cool and innovative things and they want to iterate and experiment, but the bank does place some handcuffs on them? Is that fair to say, you guys? Is that even a thing? Is that a threat?
Yeah,
I guess I'm sorry, Katie, go ahead.
I would massage the messaging slightly and say it's probably not handcuffs, but we need controls. We need to do things in a compliant manner. So to your point, everyone should be able to be innovative and use great new technology like AI to personalize and message at scale and meet consumers where they're at. You just need to have the controls in place to make sure when they're doing that, you automatically know where that post is, how often they're updating it, and if something does change in the future, how you can either take it down or update the messaging in line with your new value prop. So they work hand in hand. We don't want compliance to be like the boogeyman. They're traditionally the no-sayers, but leveraging technology makes them a strategic partner for marketing. So you should be working together.
That's true. And by the way, controls does feel better than handcuffs. So good massaging there, good massaging. All right, you guys, as we near the end, Steve, I know you were the first one when we were thinking through the Layers and Players series. You saw the link between these two solutions and between PerformLine and Cable and Katie and Shane. And just the fact that these are linked in many bankers' minds, the fact that compliance testing, it might be a broad category, but it does have these two elements at least, bare minimum, the communications layer, what is being marketed either by the bank or on the bank's behalf through fintech sponsors, as well as that operational piece. So Steve, I'm just kind of curious, not to pit one of these two fine folks against each other, but was there any rhyme or reason in your past or with what you've seen other banks do as far as where they dip their toe in first into these layers? We know both are needed, but did you take a stand? I'm putting you on the hot seat. You're welcome.
Well, I mean, I signed with PerformLine before I did Cable, but it's also, I think, if you think about it from a business perspective, marketing is top of funnel. You're spinning that message. So where is it going to break first? It's going to break with your marketing. Like as it comes down, and before I even was anywhere remotely close, before I met PerformLine or Cable, I was talking with a sponsor bank, and they're talking about a fintech that was challenging because they're going to change their marketing message. Like they were having 50 to 100 submissions every day, and the bank was shockingly having trouble keeping up with it. Fintechs want to move fast. That's just and top of funnel. They want to get those customers. They want to build up. They scale. Then the problem comes when there's all these transactions. Are you making sure that you're in compliance because we have the customer, and now we're seeing that activity. So that's where the operational piece comes in. But if we go back to our earlier conversation, you want to get in front of both of these in the beginning to have it established. If you have the funds available, then invest in it. It'll be a lot easier to set up both up front rather than just choosing one versus the other.
Yeah, makes good sense. Makes very good sense. All right, you all. As we wrap up here, restating what we've been describing is the fact that everyone has the best of intentions in the early days of a fintech bank sponsor relationship. Our job as individuals that work with or happen to be sponsor banks that are on this call here, our job is to ensure that ongoing, as we work deeper with the same fintech or expand our fintech offering, that we do control the sprawl, that we do ensure that everyone is managing back to the expectations that we initially agreed to. So the goal is to prevent the far red side of this from happening, where things just break down entirely and we're we're worse off than when we started with this relationship. We wish to ensure that ultimately moving forward, the bank is compliant and the bank is able to test the compliance of their own organization and that of their fintech programs. So I know we are here nearing time. We have 1 minute left. I just want to take us back up to this slide and encourage each of you that if you found some value in this conversation, watching it either live or after the fact, recorded on YouTube or LinkedIn or elsewhere, that you take the time to connect with both Katie and Shane. Steve and I would love to have your connections as well. But these two individuals have brought such attention to a space that you might have thought was boring before this conversation, but I hope now you understand the importance and the impact that it plays, definitely in the traditional bank side, but absolutely in the embedded space. So Katie, Shane, Steve, and I want to thank you for joining us here. And one last quick question, where can people find you? Any upcoming events you're attending?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can find us both at Fintech Meetup in a few weeks here, and on LinkedIn. I'm easily available. Stacy, you are such a fabulous host. Thank you for having me today.
Such a pleasure.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
thank you, Stacy. No, Katie hit it on the head. Just look for the folks running around in pink hoodies. That's typically how you can spot us. But yeah, Fintech Meetup and LinkedIn, and excited to have conversations with folks who are interested in learning more about the fun of compliance.
Amazing. Well, we'll see you there, Steve and I, at Fintech Meetup. Katie, we'll talk more about this Kraken type of merge.
I want some credit for that. Maybe a free shirt. I don't know.
Good. Shane, all of the great things you said today, Shane, that's probably my number one favorite.
That's top of the list. That's fair.
Well, thank you so much for your time and attention, and don't hesitate to reach out if we can ever be of assistance as you design your own embedded banking program. Bye-bye now.